Chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. We're thankful to be in the service again tonight. We're glad to see each one that's here. If you're visiting with us, we thank you for coming. Appreciate your attendance in the service tonight. Matthew chapter 5. We're going to begin reading in verse 3. Matthew 5, verse 3. This is the beginning portion of the Sermon on the Mount. I know that you're all familiar with that. Jesus is starting this sermon off with the Beatitudes, is what we know it as, the blessed statements that he makes here. We're going to start a new study tonight, and I don't know how long we'll go, something that I've had on my heart for a little while, but we're going to study the characteristics of spiritual leaders. Some things that if you are a leader in any form or fashion, whatever the case may be, these are some characteristics that should be present in your life. And the truth of this is, regardless of what type of leader you are, whether you're just a leader of your home, or whether you're actually a leader in some type of position, if you're a person of authority in a work environment, or whatever the case is, these things that we're going to talk about will help you become an effective leader. And that's what's so interesting about it, what Jesus lays out. Is just wonderful ideas concerning leaders. I'm going to mention some of these. Tonight I'm going to go through three characteristics. We'll probably slow down with some of these, and maybe in some nights just talk about one. And again, I don't know how long we'll be on this. I'm just trying to follow the Lord with it as we move forward. But these are some characteristics that we should find in spiritual leaders. Now, women, I want you to think of you looking at your husband and maybe thinking, what can I benefit from this? But there's a lot of ways that you are to be the leader of your children, and so these are effective in that style as well as you are raising your children. So these should be present. And what you're actually going to find is that each characteristic, by the way, who is the greatest spiritual leader that ever lived? Jesus Christ, obviously. And so these are all characteristics of Christ. And so they should be characteristics that are in our life anyway through spiritual growth. And that's how we obtain them. But they are not natural. They're not natural things. When you read these Beatitudes, this again somewhere along the way, you've probably read like I have, you've read this or been through it so many times that you kind of almost loses its luster. It becomes a little bit cliche when you start talking about it. You're hearing these things, but somewhere along the way, I began to read these, and I had to stop and take a step back and look at it. And I think Jesus began this message this day with these for a reason, that I think it would have got everybody's attention immediately as he began to preach these things. Because if you really consider what Jesus is saying, this is completely backwards than what you're thinking. When you think of a strong leader, what are those characteristics that you think of? What defines a man who is a strong leader? And I'm not talking about one who is in the position, but one who has actually done a good job in that role, one who's actually been a good leader in that position. What are the characteristics of a strong leader? Probably there are some things that come to your mind naturally. If you're anything like me, they naturally come to your mind that a person would have to be of a certain nature and a certain type. I love to look at the tests that the world gives, and they'll say, well, this person will make a strong leader, or this person could make a strong leader. Let me ask you this question. If you had a message at this time, when there wasn't any cell phones, wasn't any news stations, newspapers, none of that, if you had a message that you needed to get all the way around the world, and you had 12 men that you could choose, would you choose the 12 that Jesus chose? I would have chose somebody else. But Jesus chose these 12 men. And the point, we often say that these were foolish and unlearned men. The point with that is that it was irrelevant who they were. because Jesus gave them what they need to accomplish that mission. And it couldn't have been done any other way. It didn't matter how great the men were. They could have never done the job without Christ making them to be the men that they needed to be. And so they were only effective in their work because of who Christ and what Christ did for them. That's the same with any leader, any true leader. It's one that is effective. But we think that's the point. You think of a man. What does a man need to be? Well, he's going to have to be a strong-spirited man, right? He's going to have to be a man that's really, really strong. He's really a go-getter. And then the first thing Jesus says is, blessed are the poor in spirit. You see verse 3? Blessed are the poor. So we say, well, a man that needs to be a strong leader is going to need a strong spirit. No, Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit. For what? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Hold on to that one. We're going to come back to that one. It said, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Do you see how this just goes completely backwards of the characteristics of a person who we think would be a strong man in society? Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. I'm going to stop there. That's the blessed statements. And so we want to look. Let's go back for a moment to the poor in spirit idea. I may mention another one here, and then we'll move on. But the poor in spirit, blessed are they that are poor in spirit. A person who is a strong leader spiritually, and again, this works physically as well. We want to focus on the spiritual aspect of it, because that's the important part, right? When we're thinking about being a strong leader as our family, if we're not careful, we can automatically just go to the physical and say, well, I go to work and I provide. Well, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and God will do what? All of these things will be added to you. So the spiritual is actually more important than the physical. We need to focus in spiritually on being a proper leader for our households. We need to focus on, in whatever the role, whether in job, whether in church, a leader in church, and to a degree, all of the men at church, we need to be strong, and we need to be strong together. All right? So, blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean for a person to be poor in spirit? First, notice the word spirit. What do you notice about the word spirit? Capital S, lowercase s. It's a lowercase s. What does that mean? Well, he's not talking about, obviously, the Spirit of God. He's talking about the spirit of the person. And when the Bible's talking about the spirit of a person, he's talking about the nature, the disposition, the will of that individual. Same word is used in John chapter 4, lowercase s. John chapter 4, when a man is to worship in spirit and in truth. He's talking about internally, that the man needs to worship within his own heart, within himself, not just outwardly, not just from the outward man. In other words, it doesn't matter about the location and not that kind of business, but you need to worship in truth and in spirit within. Same idea. So he's talking about within the disposition of the man, the nature of the man. Blessed are the poor. Poor means lacking. The idea that Jesus is talking about here is humility. And specifically that a person would recognize his inability. The word poor means lacking. That he is lacking in the ability to accomplish something. Now, think about it from a church perspective. And maybe you're about to nominate for a teacher. Or maybe you're about to think about deacon material or something of that nature. And you've got two men or options before you. And you've got one who says, I don't know if I need to be in that position. I don't know that I don't know that I can do the job. I don't know. And you got another one that says, yeah, y'all give it to me. I can do it. Which one's more ready? The one, I'm saying the one that is telling me that I can't do it. There's no way. Why? Because he's poor in spirit. He realizes the fact that he's lacking. Well, the truth is, nobody can do it. Nobody has the ability to take on such a position, whatever position to be. If it's a teaching role, if it's the place of a deacon, none has that ability. We are lacking in ability. In other words, no man can do it without Christ. Only by Christ can it be accomplished. And so the man who is actually sees himself in lacking the ability to do that is the one who is going to lean on Christ and do a better job with it. The one who's got it figured out, knows how to do it, is not going to lean on Christ because he's got it figured out. And he's going to ultimately fail in that position. Now, again, that's what Jesus is saying. That this is the cool part about it. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, those that are lacking, those that are humble, and see that they cannot and do not have the qualities to accomplish this. Blessed are they, for theirs is what? Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In other words, Jesus is saying that these are the people that I've chosen to rule and reign with me. These are the leaders that I want. These are the men of authority that I need. I want the ones that are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Again, that's the idea of ruling and reigning with Christ. So, first one, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The next one is, blessed are they that mourn. Verse 5, blessed are the meek. Let's look at that one for a moment. Blessed are the meek. What is meekness? Meekness is a very cool attribute. It's one that's kind of difficult to nail down the exact definition of it. I like to think of it as having the authority, but only using it when absolutely necessary. Having the authority to do something, but only using that authority when absolutely necessary. Who is the meekest man that ever lived in his time? Moses. Moses was the meekest man that was upon the earth during his particular time. Moses was the leader of the nation of Israel during the time, and you look at the life of Moses, the things that he put up with, and you know, I sometimes I don't know how Moses was able to do it. Of course, it was through the Lord, and he was meek. But Moses was a man who he just took things upon himself, and he did it, and he went with it. Whatever came his way, he put up with it. He took it. Moses, y'all remember what Jethro told Moses there at that one particular time? Moses was judging the people, and he judged them from morning to evening. All day he judged them. I read that, and I was like, well, sometimes I wonder, when in the world did the children of Israel move? Well, they were supposed to be traveling through the wilderness, and you know, if Moses took that time to judge them, they probably weren't getting a lot of moving done. He was spending all of his time judging the people, and Jethro, you know, and there's enough to wear a man out. And Jethro recognized that and told him, you need to delegate that. And that wasn't Moses. I want you to understand, that wasn't Moses trying to usurp and hold on to the authority for himself. He was simply trying to do the job. Moses just, not in an authoritative way, but he recognized that he was just here to serve the people. And so in his mind, it was a place of service, and he didn't see to turn that over or delegate that to someone else, because it was just something that he was given to do, and he was a man of service. And that kind of shows the meekness of Moses, not being one to take and assert the authority, and that Moses was just simply doing what the Lord had given him to do. Who was of the 12 disciples, who y'all believe would be the greatest leader? We all think Peter would have been the greatest leader. Well, Peter thought he would, seemed to me, Peter thought he would have been the greatest leader, whether he would have been or not. Peter gets picked, and Peter became an excellent leader. But Christ had to break him of some things first. Because Peter was very strong in spirit to begin with. He was a very strong-spirited man, a very self-willed man. And the Lord had to break him of that. And he did. And he said, when thou art converted, strengthen the brethren. And he was, of course, seemingly converted at the cross. And when that he rejected or denied the Lord Jesus Christ, rather, when he denied, and Peter was completely broken in that moment. And he realized that he wasn't the man that he thought himself to be. And the Lord broke his spirit. And Peter became meek and became a great leader. But first he had to have these qualities instilled in him. And Christ did that. And Christ can do that for us as well. Peter was a man that, honestly, I look at Peter and I see myself far too often. The Lord has to break me. I think I mentioned, I don't remember, maybe sometime Sunday, a man by the name of Diotrephes. You can find him in 3 John. And Diotrephes was a man who, the Bible says, loved the preeminence. He loved to have authority. While I'm on that, what makes a good cop and a bad cop a bad cop? A bad cop's a cop that abuses his authority. A good cop is a man who only uses his authority when absolutely necessary. And that should be the way with us. Only use that authority when absolutely necessary. So we'll go back for a moment. We think about Diotrephes. Diotrephes was a man who was sincere, I believe, and some may disagree with that, but it would seem to me that he was probably a sincere man. But a man who loved preeminence. The word preeminence means to control. And in his mind, he had the best ideas, and he was going to run that church. And we see that. We say, well, that's a strong spiritual leader. No, it's not. In fact, Diotrephes was far from a strong spiritual leader. Diotrephes was a hindrance. So much so that he got in the way, and he was standing against the will of the Lord. Diotrephes was a man who hindered the work. A strong spiritual leader is not one who just loves preeminence. A strong spiritual leader, being a leader, is not all about authority. In fact, it's far from authority and only using authority when absolutely necessary. But this is the key. When it is necessary, stand up and do it. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. And it makes things uncomfortable. Again, it's also necessary. I want to turn to 1 Kings 19. I want to try to switch gears for a moment. So we see these two characteristics. We'll look at one more. 1 Kings 19. 1 Kings 19. This particular portion of Scripture that we're going to read, and you can look down to verse 19. 1 Kings 19, chapter 19, verse 19. This is the particular time where Elijah is coming to inform Elijah that he is to be the predecessor. He's to be the next prophet in Israel. He is to be the next leader of the nation of Israel. Now that's pretty substantial when you think about it. This is what's taking place in Elisha's life. There's some things that happen here that we want to take note of and kind of look into the character of Elisha for a moment. That to me is pretty cool. That some things that Elisha was willing to do in being and becoming the leader of the nation of Israel as the next prophet. So look at verse 19. So we looked at the first characteristic being poor in spirit, then meekness. These two are essential to being a strong spiritual leader. The third is selflessness and being selfless. You have to be selfless to be a strong leader. That means that you're not leading and you're not looking at what you can gain from a position. You have to be selfless, because it's not about what's being gained from the position. It's what can be accomplished with the people. In other words, that it's not about the leader, but it's the leading about the people. Let me try to put it this way. You can't think about yourself. You got to think about what's best for the folks if you're going to be an effective leader. Just like a father can't think about what he wants, he's got to think about what's best for his family. If you're going to be a good father. Now, this is the interesting thing about being a father. You're going to be a father either way. And you can be a real bad one, or you can be a real good one. But if you got kids, you're going to be one. The kind of father you want to be, now we can discuss that, but you're going to be something. But if you want to be an effective father and a strong spiritual leader to your family, then you're going to have to be selfless. And you're going to have to put aside the things that you want and that you desire to think about what's best for your family. So let's look at that. And again, you can take that thought and you can go in all different directions and aspects of your life. Probably mention some things that we even brushed on Sunday. So let's look at for a moment verse 19. So he departed, that is Elijah. So he departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, Let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow thee. And he said unto him, Go back again, for what have I done to thee? And he returned back from him and took a yoke of oxen and slew them and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen and gave unto the people, and they did eat. And then he arose, went after Elijah, and ministered unto him. I'm going to stop reading there. And you read those 3 verses, and you may say, well, what in the world does that have to do with being a leader? I want you to think about something for a moment. There's times as a pastor, looking at it from my perspective, and you've probably faced something similarly in leading, there's times that you face extreme discouragement. Things are not working out the way that you want them to work out. And there's always going to be a temptation to go back where you came from. And there are times in leading that I think, man, it'd be a whole lot easier to just go back and write loans at Priority One Bank. Or collect money, or, It'd be a whole lot easier to go back and do those things. But what did Elisha do? Elisha was a farmer by occupation. And so the Bible tells us that he was plowing with those oxen when Elijah came by and put the mantle upon him. And so obviously he's recognizing what Elijah is telling him is about to take place. You're going to be my predecessor. The Lord's called you to be the next man, the next prophet in Israel. You're about to be the spiritual leader of the nation of Israel. So he tells him, I ask him, let me go back home, let me kiss my father and mother and tell them bye, and then I'll come follow you. And what he does when he goes back home is he's an occupation, he's a farmer by occupation, and he's even plowing at the time that Elijah finds him. And so when he goes back, he takes a yoke of the oxen that he's plowing with, and the instruments, the implements that he's using, even the plow, and he burns them, sets them on fire, kills the oxen, and offers them to the Lord. So you say, well, what does that have to do? Well, he ain't coming back to farm with that plow. He burned it. In other words, he burned his escape route. He burnt the ships. He ain't coming back. There's no more. And you see that as an act of complete selflessness, that it doesn't matter at this point what's good for him. It doesn't matter if the job gets too difficult and he wants to come back home. Now he can't come back home because there's nothing to do. He's burnt it. And the point is that we see Romans chapter 12 in that we're to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice to the Lord. Our occupation, our thoughts for life, our will, everything that we might want, we sacrifice that selflessly to the Lord, that we could be the man that God would have us to be. That we could be the effective leader. You see, that selflessness. It doesn't matter how bad the job gets. He ain't going home. Because that's what's best for the nation of Israel. Because God called him. And again, not because he's anybody, but because of what the Lord can do through him. A man who is a proper leader is a man who has to be selfless. That's what's best for the people, what's best for his family, is what is the forefront of his head. Not what's best for him. I want to ask you something as a leader. How often do you make a decision concerning your family and what you've made a decision about what you want and what's best for you? What's easiest for you? And maybe you take the easy road out. We can't take the easy road out as a spiritual leader. We have to take sometimes a very hard road. But if it's the hard road that's best for our family, we take the hard road. That's why he's strong. It takes strength for a man to do that. And I'm not talking about a muscle man that can bench how much ever. I'm talking about a man that's willing to take it upon himself and do what's right concerning his family. We talk about Washington and all of this. You know what's wrong with Washington? Is the leaders in Washington think more about themselves than the people they represent. And if you change that and you put people in Washington that were selfless, that actually thought about their representatives, and the representatives meant more to them than what they wanted, Washington would change pretty quick. If you put us in that same position and we thought more about those that we're to be leading, then we can become an effective leader as well. So what's some characteristics? Again, we're going to probably go through a lot as we go through Wednesday nights. I don't know how far we'll take it, however far the Lord wants. Poor in spirit, humility, meekness, selflessness are essential for leadership, for the welfare and the state of the church. Today, the only way this church can function properly is to lay ourselves aside and say what's best for the church, not what's best for me. Not what do I want. Tonight I ask you to pray for me, that I could be the leader that God would ask me to be, not only here but in my home. And I could be an example for my family, somebody to follow. By the way, one of the reasons that Jesus was such a great leader was he didn't run back here and he say, y'all go do this, and I'm going to sit over here and watch you. What does it mean to be a disciple? You can say a lot of different definitions. One of the definitions is a follower. Jesus walked, and the disciples are expected to walk behind him. Jesus set an example. And a strong leader is to set an example before his family that they can follow. Tonight, are you setting that example? And you pray for me that I could set that example for my family as well, while we have a verse of a song.